Hello and welcome to the Choralosophy Podcast. This is episode 159, The Entrepreneurial Future of Choral Music. Could it be that the new era of the choral entrepreneur is what we need to save choral music? After the pandemic, we have seen a resurgence of enthusiasm for choral music amongst the already initiated. But program enrollments are down, concert attendance is down, positions have been cut, and conference attendance has not yet recovered. Sheet music sales has not yet recovered. It could be that we have entered a new era, an era where a choral resurgence will depend upon people like Ryan Main and shows like this one, to toot our own horn. Colleagues with the willingness to leave the safety of institutional employment behind and make the case in the community for the value of choral music could be just what we need. In this episode, we discuss the various ways in which entrepreneurship can manifest itself in fine arts spaces. We discuss lessons learned in creating both nonprofit and for-profit choral music-centered ventures. It's time to make the case that choral entrepreneur doesn't have to be a dirty word, so stick around. As the school year ramps up for those of you who are teaching students to read music in any capacity, don't forget Sight Reading Factory memberships, and don't forget, there are tons of ways to get a discount on Sight Reading Factory, but you want to use the Choralosophy discount code to continue to support this show, so I encourage you to enter Choralosophy at checkout and get 10% off when you renew your Sight Reading Factory. I'm excited to tell you about Ludus.com, a new platform designed for the performing arts by people from the arts. With Ludus, you'll have access to a friendly, knowledgeable customer success team that's available when you need them. And the best part, there are no setup costs, contracts, or hidden fees. It's 100% free to your program, so why not give it a try and see how Ludus can help you streamline your operations and put the focus back on your passion for the arts. Choralosophy listeners can go to ludus.com/choralosophy for an upgrade for free to their marketing. I am also proud to offer you, the listener, who gets value out of this show, the thousands of people who listen and I don't ever even know your name, you have the opportunity to go to patreon.com/choralosophy and decide to chip in $3 every month to make sure that this show can continue providing you value. So head on over there and make sure you sign up to get all those extra materials, but also just because you want to say thank you and buy me a coffee, so to speak, every month. So head over to Patreon. There are, of course, various levels that you can join, and at the producer or above level, we have Brian Long, Chandler Smith, Venture Studios, John Warner, Jonah Clixbull, Ulrika Igrain Munoz Alarcon, Angie Schilling, Carlos, David Kowalczyk, James Mock, Jared Hendricks, Kyle Peterson, Max Jackson, Michael Herron, Nathan Hines, Ryan Main, and Stephen Kathy Kakachik. Head to patreon.com/choralosophy and join the crowd. Ryan Main.
Hey.
Welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Remind everybody who you are.
So I am a composer, I'm a choir director, I'm a former teacher. I am the new editor of Endeavor Music Publishing, and I'm the director of the Youth Chorus Kansas City.
Okay, awesome. Well, welcome back, and we're going to be talking about the concept of entrepreneurship in the context of our music education /choral / I would really even say we might even get into concepts that the broader fine arts, performing arts world might find also interesting and helpful. So first, let's talk about that. Of course, you started out as a teacher in public school, like many of us do, like probably the vast majority of our world. That's where we earn our paycheck. Mm-hmm. But at some point along the way, you went off in your own direction. If you wouldn't mind, because you've been on the show before, and so some people, and I'll link the last episode in the show notes, so I don't need you to rehash the whole story. But what did it feel like to break away from that automatic paycheck and just say, okay, I'm going to be an entrepreneur, like people in other fields have to do all the time? What was that internal feeling like?
I'll be honest, it's a pretty scary thing. In my case was there were some overlaps where I kind of took the big leap and was trying to figure out how to build the airplane on the way down. Mm-hmm. But then I had this interim position at a larger church offered to me, and so that kind of actually relieved some of that pressure. And I think in hindsight, I would have simply planned to have more of a plan before I took that big leap. I think it's always better to have kind of a proof of concept before you take that leap into not having health insurance or not having the steady paycheck. But to your exact question of how did it feel once I was truly only making a living from the things that I was doing or that I had started, it feels great. It's, I want to, I think, be both someone who urges caution that this is a big decision, but it is also absolutely worth it. If you are able to take that step into never having a boss again, like that's a pretty good feeling.
Yeah,
it really is.
And feeling like you can look at the thing you built and kind of have that satisfaction of like, I built this. We even get that at age 2 when we put together our first Legos, like, look what I did, look what I did. And correct me if I'm wrong, or feel free to just disagree with this, but I feel like in our music education dominated world, that sense of entrepreneurship is just very, very rare, but growing recently. You know what I mean?
I think so. And something that I notice as well is a lot of people who do break out, I think they trend towards either pretty established pathways, such as maybe getting into the music retailing business or working for travel companies, something like that, or going into the nonprofit world, because I think there's a bit of a taboo when we hear of a business or a for-profit business. And that's actually something I'm going to be talking about in my session tomorrow here at MCDA, that these things are not inherently good or not good, businesses and nonprofits. There's actually a lot more gray area there than people think. But I lost my train of thought there.
Well, no, that's good actually, because I was maybe we could stick there for a little bit with that distinction. I think, so here's my harebrained theory. My harebrained theory about this, and the reason that entrepreneurship in our ecosystem is so rare, is because we have an artificial, kind of unnatural quantity of our jobs come from taxpayers.
Yeah.
Which means that we have not had to cultivate an atmosphere that cheers on creativity, thinking outside of the box, building a business, creating value for the customer, which is almost a dirty word in our ecosystem, because many of us have had the privilege, to use that term, of just having a taxpayer-funded paycheck that comes every day, every week, or every month, regardless of whether or not we're doing a good job, regardless of whether or not people are showing up to our concerts. We don't have to worry about those things. The paycheck comes anyway. And so I guess my rant there is that it's not to say that it's not a rant against public school. I love public school. But if your entire ecosystem, everybody who comes to the convention is maybe 85% of the people are making their money that way, there's not going to be a big culture of let's learn more about how to create an entrepreneurial choral music approach.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the conversations that are happening around the value of entrepreneurial endeavors are outside of the choral world as well. So, for myself, it was just listening to podcasts where there was either an entrepreneur who was a guest who I thought was interesting, and I would seek out more information about that, or just reading books written by those same people. That kind of got me imagining the idea that I could do something entirely outside of this ecosystem that you're talking about. And I think the other thing along with that, something that you mentioned is if we are public school teachers, we're going to get the same paycheck whether we're doing a really awesome job or a really not awesome job. And that is... depending on how you're looking at that, it's either a good thing or a bad thing. But if you're the person who is busting your butt to create awesome opportunities for your students, and you are earning the same paycheck or even less than somebody who's been in that same building for 15 years and is just kind of showing up for the paycheck, that can be pretty frustrating. And so I had that experience. I worked really hard as a teacher, And there were times where it was really hard to make ends meet, or I was working a second job. I had a church job for many years while I was teaching. And that's a frustrating thing. And so something that I think is worth considering, rather than adding a second institution to your jobs, is to consider, can you monetize your interests? Can you monetize the extra thing that you're already doing that you just enjoy? In your case, I think this is really interesting, that you like having conversations and about philosophy and about teaching, and that you've found a way to monetize that.
Yeah, and in fact, you said earlier in your session, I hope people won't hear this until after your session, so you don't have to give, you won't be giving anything away.
Yeah,
if we talk about some of these things. But the distinction between the for-profit concept, which I think, again, there's a bias within our ecosystem because most of our jobs are not for profit. I'm just going to say that I think that there's a pretty large misunderstanding of what for-profit even means.
Yeah.
And so we're just going to get nerdy a little bit for a second to set up this, then I want to hear your reaction. So one of the things that, for example, the Choralosophy podcast is a for-profit entity. Which means that I'm not there's no registered 501c3, there's no board of directors, there's no a group of people that has to sit here and make sure that everything we produce on this show is like serving some mission statement. It's just me, and I like you said, I like to have conversations and publish them for other people to hopefully expand the conversation. But if I wasn't making any money doing this, I would have to do other jobs. And so at that point, you start to think, well, what does for-profit mean? It means that if I put all this time and energy and buying microphones and buying lights and hosting websites and advertising, all that stuff, I spend money in the hopes that I can make some of that money back and maybe some more, right?
Right.
So that's all that for-profit means.
Right.
But yet we attach this concept of nefariousness to it. So I'll throw in I'm just speaking for myself, and then I want to hear your way of looking at it for your companies and endeavors. Is that for this show, yes, I want to make money doing it, but there is still a sense of the community good that I hope to make money by serving the good. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah.
And so I think more businesses are that way than people realize. I grew up, my dad was a very successful business person before he retired. And I remember, because I worked for him for a long time, I remember hearing speeches that he would give during faculty meetings about our job, we make money, is when we figure out our clients, when we figure out the things that are causing them pain, and then we solve that pain.
Right.
That's when we make money.
Yeah, and to play off that exact example, you could have a company who would then try to offer that problem-solving service at a fair price that's going to make everybody come out of that transaction feeling like that's been
win-win.
Win-win. But you could also have a company that would then buy up all the competitors using the profits that they had earned, essentially form a monopoly, and then use that monopoly to squeeze their customers for what most of us would consider an unfair price.
Yeah.
And they would come out feeling like it's a win-lose. And so that's two examples of essentially the same service being used for good and win-win, or the opposite. And in the nonprofit world, I think it is a little bit more, in my mind at least, it's a bit more of a gray area, because nonprofits do require more buy-in initially. But I think if folks have in their mind that nonprofit equals good and for-profit equals bad, even if it's at a subconscious level, I think the easiest way to kind of break out of that paradigm is to imagine whatever your political affiliation is, there's a nonprofit out there that's working exactly in the opposite of that. So for anybody who has a certain leaning, there's a nonprofit out there
who is your enemy.
Exactly.
Yes, right.
Yeah,
and there are probably for-profits who are your friend.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
Exactly. And there are plenty of other examples as well. A for-profit business dealing in a generally fair and win-win kind of way but then takes some of those earnings and simply donates them to a good cause.
Yeah.
There again is a lot of gray area here, and both of us, I think, we both tread in both of these worlds.
Yes.
And see the good, or the potential good and the potential bad in both.
Right. That's a great point. I work with a nonprofit organization. I deal with a board of directors and all of the things that goes along with that. And then, of course, I mentioned already the kind of a for-profit approach here. And then I also work for the taxpayers and in school. So I kind of have my feet dipped in all the things. But so you, of course, also have a nonprofit side, a for-profit side. Do you ever, this is probably a dumb question, but for the sake of the conversation, I think it's relevant. Do you ever feel like those two sides of you are in conflict?
A little, I think. I keep trying to find ways that I could connect them somehow, and it never really seems to make a lot of sense. And so I think in that way, even just in how I spend my time on a daily basis, I've kind of settled on the idea that I'm going to truly spend my time working for the Youth Chorus of Kansas City on Mondays and Tuesdays, and then on Wednesdays and Thursdays I'm going to do composing. I'm going to work on the publishing company, and that kind of compartmentalization of my time works better than trying to kind of go from one task to the other, and to imagine almost myself first as a nonprofit artistic and executive director, and then later in the week I'm imagining myself as a small business owner, and for some reason that works better for me than just mornings and afternoons, for example.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. In my case, I kind of militantly resist trying to think about myself in those different ways. I try to think about it as all of the same.
Yeah.
Now, and it's not a question of where my paycheck for each individual thing is coming from. It's more of a sense of what is my mission?
Right.
What is my mission? Not Choralosophy Podcast's mission, not Lee Summit High School's mission, not Contourai's mission, but what is the Chris Muntz mission, and how can I live that mission through any job that I have? And that sounds like I'm in Sunday school a little bit, but how do I glorify God through all of but it's that same kind of thing. And so when people ask if I don't want a long conversation and someone asks me what I do for a living, I just say I do choral music.
Right.
Right. And what does that mean? Okay, well, I do this and this and this. If they want to talk more, I'll go into detail about what that means. But I just passionately believe that more people need to be doing and doing choral music and being impacted by it. So at school I teach kids about it, and then on the podcast I tell people about it, and then when I do stuff with Contour, I'm trying to bring that concept out into the community. So do you ever think about the connection between the nonprofit, the composing, let's just call it the composing side of you, and then the community choir side of you, and how that all serves a mission?
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, how I spend most of my time is creative problem solving, and towards the same end. In fact,
Right.
I liked a lot of what you just said, and I'm probably going to borrow a lot of that.
Feel free.
Yeah, but I think a lot of my job is on a day-to-day basis is creative problem solving, and that includes when I'm composing. It's when I'm actually putting new notes on paper and conceptualizing new melodies. I think that's the only time I'm really not thinking in those terms. I'm just truly letting the music flow in whichever way I think makes the most sense. And then once that's done, I'm shifting back into creative problem solving and figuring out what is going to be the best voicing and voice leading for an SATB group. But okay, remember this is a advanced SATB group with a really awesome tenor section, so I'm going to go into that mode. But it works the same way if I have a large purchase that I want to make that I think is going to benefit the Youth Chorus of Kansas City, and so I need to. That's not in the budget. How am I going to solve this problem?
Right.
The only answer is to get creative, and I'm going to start figuring out how to problem solve.
Yeah. As long as there's something in your head that says there is a solution, I just haven't found it yet.
Yes.
Then that allows for, and a lot of that, I do find that mindset is more common amongst entrepreneurial type people, and not everyone is entrepreneurial.
Yeah, and that was something I was thinking about a lot leading up to this conversation. You know, is the message here anybody can be an entrepreneur and everybody should try it? I don't think so.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, and there's a level of risk aversion that I think we all need to kind of be aware of in ourselves. You know, I just grew up having a bit of a daredevil tendency, you know, and it wasn't anything involving a trampoline and an ATV that I didn't want to try. You know? And so now it's playing out in my professional life. But I think you know, if someone is excited about the idea, but they maybe feel somewhat risk adverse, like I would love to have a life where I am my own boss. I'm doing whatever it is that really excites me about choral music, and I want to give that a shot. I think my suggestion is to take that one small step at a time. You know, in my case, I can't remember if I talked about this the last time I was on, but it was taking a PDF of my music and putting it up on a free website that I created.
You did. Yeah,
it was a 100% cash positive business. There was no loss involved. There was no risk involved. But as soon as I started to see some returns from that, because of who I am as a person, I went pretty hard.
That gave you permission to pursue that.
Yeah. But I, you know, if I were more risk adverse, I would have gone in many more steps, and that's what I would recommend for most people. I think.
Right. You know, yeah, that's good. And I think that when we say, at least I'll speak for myself, when I say that not everyone's an entrepreneur, and that when you say, and maybe not everyone should do that, but the way I think it is, everyone should try to do entrepreneurial things if they want to.
Yeah.
But what I'm saying is that I just don't think everyone wants to. I think there's a certain personality type, there's a certain risk aversion, like you said. I think that's astute. Just the idea that there are some people who are perfectly happy collecting a paycheck that they know will come, living out their life, and doing that. And I just want to be clear, there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
There is absolutely nothing wrong with that. But at the same time, I think sometimes I come into this conversation a little bit defensive, because sometimes the people who don't want to be an entrepreneur resent the people that do, in my experience.
Yeah.
And so so the way I think of it is like, well, you can't have it both ways. Like, for example, as soon as I started Contrai, I started getting questions and like incredulous statements like, how do you get these adults to come sing for you? Well, I just ask them. Or when I started the podcast, how'd you get sponsors? I asked them. You know, like, and many told me no, but then I just kept asking other people. You know, or like when Ryan Main decided to start putting his name on the podcast, we went into Starbucks, I think it was, and we sat down and I talked about this thing I want to create, and I had that similar conversation with other people who said, right? And so an entrepreneur, I think, ultimately, whatever level of an entrepreneur, has to be somebody who's willing to have those conversations, be told no, fail, and keep going anyway. And I think maybe just not everybody wants to do that.
It's true, and I have certainly, I think, at earlier points in my life, the risk of rejection was actually somehow worse than the risk of like an abstract start a business and it fails. You know, just someone would look at me and say, "No, thank you."
Right.
Was somehow horrible to me, but I think it is simply a matter of doing it enough times to realize it doesn't physically hurt you, it doesn't monetarily hurt you. It's just some people are simply not going to be interested in that thing that you're selling, and there's going to be more people out there who are interested. And that's never been more true. There's never been more niche businesses than there is today. You know, for example, every time I scroll on social media, they have somehow found, through whatever I linger on long enough and whatever I like, they found some new incredibly niche like gadget that is going to interest me, and I'm like, yeah, I do want to buy this, you know, marble that rolls around on something by a magnet and makes sand look cool.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's great. And speaking of logging onto the phone and seeing all these things, it's in our choral ecosystem. I think one of the very first things I said when we started recording is that this choral entrepreneurship spirit is rare but growing. And so let's go there next a little bit. Just like it's just kind of talking about the trend, which is every time I open my phone, there's a new choir podcast. I'm like the old guy in a game of 50 now. Which is bizarre, and then every time I open my phone, there's also a new like online delivery system for literacy or for professional development for the teacher, and there are a growing number of entrepreneurially spirited choral musicians. It's still rare overall, but growing. Do you notice that, or is that just my algorithm showing me that?
No, I think it's true, and I've noticed the uptick in podcasts. I think that's really interesting. And I think when I started listening to podcasts, I didn't have that many friends who were listening to podcasts, and now I feel like everybody around me has their own, playlist that they're listening to all the time, and mine is now a bunch of choral podcasts. And yeah, I find that really interesting. As far as the other businesses, a lot of them seem very tech-based. And I'm starting to also notice an uptick in service-based businesses, such as I'm going to offer a masterclass in this, or I'm going to offer consulting on something that I'm truly an expert at. And I think in all of those realms, I think tech-related choral businesses are probably the toughest for most choral directors to kind of get into, but these other realms of taking the one thing that you have the most expertise in. Let's say everybody is always saying to you, I love the music that you're programming. You program such great literature. I cannot wait to come to every concert and see what new stuff you have found on the depths of the internet and or from this culture and this culture. That can be a consulting service. There are people who simply do not know how to find great literature.
Or don't want to spend the time to do it.
Exactly.
And would rather have someone help them.
Exactly. And there was a time as a teacher where I felt exasperated. I didn't know where to find things other than the front pages of the big retailer websites. And I would have paid someone to simply fill in my program for me, and maybe I'd go in and change one or two pieces after the fact. I would have paid for that. So that's just an example, and podcasts, I don't know, it's hard for me to say, but I think I'd be curious to get your thoughts on this. I think the pitfall would be maybe to try to figure out the thing that hasn't been done. And the actual opportunity is, if you're good at talking to people and you have interesting conversations, to take out a phone and start recording it. And that the world can't get enough of good, interesting conversations with interesting people.
That's been my experience, but again, it's kind of like the entrepreneur thing. It's also not for everybody.
Yeah.
So, for example, one of the most, probably the biggest part of my business model that people probably wouldn't see as a business model, they might just see it if they see the online version that is me. Like if I make a post that is maybe some kind of a short statement that's designed to start people having a conversation, there will be X percentage of people that just see that as like, this guy's just trying to piss people off. He's just trying to be provocative, which is true. But what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to be provocative, not of your emotions and negative reactions. I'm trying to be provocative of your conversation. I want you to speak, because I actually believe in this almost like mystical power of conversation, that it's like incredibly valuable to society. And so if I put a post out that might reach 5,000-6,000 people, I know that some percentage of that group of people will get mad. And then there will be also a percentage of that group of people that go, oh, Choralosophy podcast, what's that? I'm going to go check that out. Even if it's only 5% of the people that see that post, that's how I grow my audience. Because like, oh, I'm interested in thought-provoking conversations. So the way I think of it is like, I'm trying to find the right audience for what I like to talk about. I'm not trying to please everybody.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It does, and
as a composer, you kind of have to do that.
Yeah, that certainly resonates with me. I think just to speak to my my artistic process a little bit. As a composer, what I really enjoy is, one, I am so thorough, I think, in just finding good, unused, or underused texts. You'll see very few of my pieces. If you were just to scan everything, I think you would find close to zero texts that had been used by more than two other composers. And oftentimes zero. I'm working with living poets. I'm trying to find things that have simply never been set before, and then I want to film score that poem. I want to create the sound world that poem exists within, and then find the most compelling way of bringing that to life through melody and harmony. And that's what I love to do.
Yeah.
And I can't make myself care how someone else is going to feel about this melody, because the second that I do that, it's just no longer my voice.
Mm-hmm.
And so I can only imagine it's the exact same thing for you, that you would find yourself tripping over your words in conversations like this.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, what is this type of person going to think, or what is this type of person?
You make yourself crazy.
Yes.
That way.
Yeah, and so my true test, and this is what I recommend for all composers, is to put the music away for a day or a week after you've hit the double bar line, and to come back to it and to say, would I listen to this on its own if I didn't know who had written it?
Mm-hmm.
And that is the test. And I think once you get good at that, you can kind of do it along the way as you're writing too. But initially, especially for young composers, it's put it away, come back to it. Would you want to listen to this?
Yeah.
If it just showed up on a concert program that you happen to be at. If the answer is no, you need to start deleting and working to make it something that you would enjoy, because then you're going to want to put it out there into the world.
That's a good system, and I think kind of to highlight also something you said a minute ago, where you're talking about how you don't like to use texts that have been used too much. That kind of resonated with me, because it was an alignment, I guess, to what I was talking about with my strategy, which is that there would be some X percentage of the choir music, sheet music purchasing world that would be looking for texts that they know, that they like, and so that means you might be making a decision that you will write off some percentage of the public. Don't know what that percentage that is, but it's, as an artist, you have to make a decision of like, this is my mission, like we were talking about before. And not everyone will align with my mission. There might be just somebody might go on looking, I just need to find a setting of I Carry Your Heart With Me,
right.
Which of course there are 90 million settings of that.
Right.
And then that might not lead you to Ryan Main's website, and that means that you lose out on that sale.
Sure.
And you have to decide that that's okay.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, exactly. And I simply want to enjoy composing when I'm 80. That's my kind of long-term goal, I think, as an artist. And if at some point along the way what I'm writing isn't really resonating with as many people as it is now, I have to be okay with that, because I love it. I will start writing something, and it's still usually pretty tough to get started. I think it is for a lot of composers. There's kind of this hump at the beginning of the process, and once I get over that initial hump and the ideas start flowing, it is just all downhill, and it's so much fun. It's a blast. I love it, and if it didn't feel like that, I would stop doing it.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Let's move into one more direction, and into the more, because we've been floating in the realm of philosophy about entrepreneurship, and so let's move it into more of the practical.
Yeah.
You have, once you tell us about the nonprofit arts organization that you started, give us that little bit of history, and just talk to us a little bit about what lessons you learned doing that.
Sure. So I founded the Youth Chorus of Kansas City in 2017, and that was something that came out of my experience as a teacher. That I worked in a primarily low-income school, about 95% for introduced lunch. I taught middle school all of that time, and high school for 2 of those years. And I pushed quite a bit to make that a great program and something that the students were really proud of. And we ended with a performance at the Southwest American Choral Directors Association, and that was, I think, kind of the peak for that program.
Yeah.
And so I came away from that feeling like there's something truly of value here in this equation, that students who in that setting didn't have a lot else going on in their lives, they didn't have outside programs that they were able to afford, or that a lot of things that they were able to kind of take pride in, that's something that could work beyond just the small scale of this one school. And so I felt a tremendous amount of purpose from that job, but it also took all of my time. And so the simple idea for founding the youth chorus was that on a citywide scale, and plus sustainable. Truly that was the entire business plan at that point, or nonprofit plan. So I found a few starting members of our board of directors, just 3 folks who were at the church that I was working at that time, who resonated with what I was talking about. And together we went through the steps of forming a nonprofit and got it off the ground. We started with 20 singers in the first year, which, as you can imagine, that's a pretty small group, ages 3 through 9 to start.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and now, sorry, not ages, grades.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
That'd be a classroom management problem.
Yes,
right there.
I am not an elementary expert, but grades 3 through 9, and then so 20 students in grades 3 through 9 and a single choir. And this year we are at 5 choirs. We've got about 150 singers signed up, and this is our 7th season now. And we also had COVID in there, as did everybody, so that slowed the curve a little bit. But that's the trajectory of the youth chorus and the initial idea, and the way that it's working now, and why I think I'm so excited about it still is that it is, I think, a melting pot. We have the entire range of the socioeconomic spectrum in the youth chorus. We were able to take some of the money that we were making by offering a great service that people want to pay a fee to be a part of, who were able to do that. And we are now able to offer scholarships to 100% of the people who ask for a scholarship. And we also offer a transportation program, which was incredibly difficult to get off the ground.
Yeah.
I was really actually appalled at how difficult that is, and mostly because of the insurance. It's really, really tough. But we now have that finally off the ground. And I think that it's kind of everything that I'd hoped that it would be.
Wow, that's great. Yeah, the transportation thing ends up being, that's been our experience in Contra too with our summer program is, okay, so how do we get kids from certain socioeconomic backgrounds that would love to come sing, don't have anyone who will take them, don't have any way to get there, and what do you do about that? But so that's awesome, and that has been our stumbling block also. Yeah. Which is a terrible, like you said, appalling that it is that hard. But yeah, it would be insurance, it would be a vehicle, it would be finding someone to pay someone to drive them sometimes, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and it took us about 2.5 years of work to finally overcome that. And we can touch base about that after this too. But there is no easy answer. Some of it was things falling into place for us that made it possible. So it's a shame.
Yeah, for sure. So what would you say, going from, you said 7 seasons, starting this youth chorus from 20 and building it over time, and I imagine over the course of that time, your vision and your goals for what that organization could be changed in the sense that it's not exactly the same as it was when you first started it. Is that a fair guess?
Yeah, I think my initial idea, if you just imagine a mature nonprofit youth choir organization, my mind goes to some of the more well-known groups like the Young People's Chorus of New York or Chicago Children's Choir or maybe Vancouver Youth Choirs, that there are several graded groups that the pinnacle of that organization is the high school group that's 9 through 12, and it's always really big and robust. The biggest challenge that I've found in the youth chorus is that in the Kansas City area, there are lots of really good high school choir programs. And that's not the case
Everywhere. Right. Yep.
And it was something I really just didn't anticipate, that it would be so difficult to start a high school program. And starting with the age ranges that we did, grades 3 through 9, was really just more of a kind of throwing a dart at a dartboard, just kind of guessing, like, here's where I think we'll be able to recruit. And we added up to 9-12 the next year. But this is the first year that we are actually able to have a full-sized high school group plus a pull-out chamber group. And that's been 7 years in the works, because it just takes a lot of time. And a lot of those students who are now in our high school group have been with us for a few years and have worked their way up. And so I think one of our strengths is retention, but a challenge that I simply never foresaw was that I next year, not this year currently, but next year will probably be the first year that I get to fully dedicate myself just to the high school group, and I'm not directing one of the younger groups as well.
Okay, yeah. So let's talk about then your the project that you're working on with publishing, which has now changed. So you've got this idea originally, which is you quit teaching, you start composing for yourself, you create your own website, ryanmain.com, which does that even still exist?
It does. I'm
sure it would, yeah. But then now you've decided to take more people under your umbrella. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so I've started to notice a little bit more of a tie, and you actually asked me about this earlier, and I'm realizing this might be a circle back answer to something you asked earlier. But I have had an interest in a long time since the first time I got an email from a young composer and a choir in Tennessee who had sung one of my pieces. I'm pretty sure it was Dies Irae at that point, and said, I love this. I'm really interested in writing music, and here's my music. What do you think? And I just never had that experience before. I had lots of great teachers and professors along the way who urged me and helped me just get all the skills I needed to do what I'm doing today. But I was never on that end of it. And I never imagined myself being a professor of composition or in academia in any way. But I wanted to be helpful to this person who was reaching out to me, and so I just offered them my honest feedback. And we've been emailing back and forth for 5 years now, and he is now an undergrad in music composition. And I've since had that relationship with several other composers, including composers who are choir directors who never had any kind of formal education in music composition, but they simply started writing music or arranging music for their own choirs.
Yeah.
And because they met me at a conference, or maybe they're in the Kansas City area and we're friends, they would send me their music and say, what do you think? Is there anything you could do? And a few years ago, one of I think our mutual friends in the Kansas City area, Stephen Rue, sent me a piece and said, would you ever consider publishing this? And I said, well, I've got a website, I can try it, but it's called Ryan Main Music, so it might be a little weird, but if you're cool with it, I am. And so I put his piece out there, and it did great. And I really enjoyed the process of going back and forth with him, finding myself being an editor, helping him kind of with the nuts and bolts. There needs to be a slur marking here and on these grace notes, or just these little details. Or there were some other things, like the choir's going to need to breathe in this part, I think was one of the things we discussed. And And so I developed this interest in finding the potential in young composers, or in composers who didn't have a lot of experience. And that's since translated to composers maybe who have a piece that has a lot of potential, but maybe they've put it up on their website for $15 and there's a single voicing, and the way they've written it is pretty hard to understand for an average choir director who's browsing, thousands of pieces for their 10 choirs that they direct.
Right.
So something that I can offer, I think, is in these past 7 years, I've had a lot of experience with what the retail market of sheet music looks like, and what choir directors are going to see and want to program, or what they're going to see and say no thanks. And move
or
right
what
on.
they'll avoid.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's not always what you would expect.
Yeah.
If you have an accompaniment that sounds just a little bit cheesy in the first 3 bars, a lot of people are never going to listen beyond those first 3 bars. I mean, it's just a fact, I think, that matters. And here's a really silly one, and I'm going to drop a trade secret. If the title of your piece starts with the letter M or beyond, the chances of a choir director ever seeing it goes down by about 50%, because a lot of people, when they search, it's alphabetized.
Yeah.
And they never
my goodness,
get beyond.
yes, that's right. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, so if you are a choir director and you feel like, gosh, I keep seeing the same stuff, just if you get 20 pages of search results, start on page 10 and keep going.
So don't call your song Moon Shadow, call it A Moon Shadow.
That's right. It's silly, but I had a composer who had this brilliant piece, and I've worked with him to get it published, and he wanted to change the title from a word that started with B that was kind of cool and intriguing to something else. And I said, no, keep it this way.
Keep the B. Because the choir director won't be asleep by the time they scroll through. Yeah, that's true. That's true. So yeah, and I think that's really awesome. And I also think I'll throw out too, and maybe you've already thought about this, but with some composers, especially the composers who are choir teachers, like you said, maybe being a composer is not their full-time thing. That doesn't necessarily mean they wouldn't write something great, but they also probably wouldn't be the ideal candidate for a bigger publishing company that wants to make sure that they form a relationship with somebody who's going to churn out a bunch of stuff that will sell. And in which case, this is where that self-publishing or small publishing company comes into play, where I could, you've got that one great piece that's a banger, I'll publish that one great piece and maybe that's it.
Right. And I think if you're paying attention, I think there are a lot of those. And I think there are different reasons why you might end up seeing one great piece from a composer and just nothing else. And I don't know about you, but I do oftentimes wonder why that is. Mm-hmm. And now I'm in the position to be able to start reaching out to those composers and saying, hey, have you ever thought about this? But I think one of the reasons is they earn 10% of the royalty, and or 10% royalty on the sale, I should say. And having been on the other side of that, my first pieces that I ever published were as a band composer. I was a band kid growing up, and so I wrote a few pieces for wind ensemble that were published. I earned 10% on those, and I started to lose interest after a while, because I would get a royalty check twice a year for a piece that was selling really well, and it was not enough to really ever imagine being able to do anything with that. I certainly can never make a living at 10%. And I think anybody who wants to earn a living making 10% needs to write a lot of music, and a lot of mass market broad appeal music to even get close to that. Mm-hmm. I don't think most composers really want to do that, want to churn. I think all of us, we want to be excited about the things that we're excited about. So I think it is the royalty that does turn off a lot of composers. And I think, to your point, I suspect that a lot of the publishing relationships are not necessarily, there's not much of a mentorship aspect to that. And I would certainly welcome any composer who's interested in making 70% of the royalties or of the sales of their pieces to contact me. And if you don't want to mentor, that's fine. But something that I'm really interested in is helping people who I see potential in. And, to circle this back, that's where I think maybe is the common thread in my teaching career and in my now publishing career is I love finding potential and helping in others and helping them realize that. And when that starts to kind of come to fruition and they start to see that potential in themselves, I can't think of any more gratifying experience.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Well, let's wrap this up with just some final thoughts on where you see all of this going. So we kind of started out by talking about entrepreneurship in choral music is rare but growing. You've got projects that are growing. I've got projects that are growing. So there is an appetite out there for a new and different choral landscape, right? So if you could say, like, your Endeavor Publishing and your Youth Chorus of Kansas City, where would you be really, really happy if 10 years from now those organizations are doing X? Describe what that looks like 10 years from now.
Oh, that's a great question. I think for the Youth Chorus, it would be, I would be really happy if I were able, if I could step away from it completely and know that it was just going to do great on its own.
Yeah, I have that same thought about Contre.
Yeah. And I don't want to yet, but I just want it to be healthy and broad-based.
Stable enough to be able to have someone else, and what's the word? Turnkey, to where a new person, if you were wanting to retire, could come in, say, like, yes, they would have their own vision for its future, but it was stable enough that they could step in and start working and getting it going.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I think that is, at least in the business aspect of it, or the organizational aspect, that's kind of what I imagine. But musically, just there is a choir for a student who's coming in at pretty much any age and at any level of experience, that they're going to be able to have a good experience. So that's the other aspect to that. And the top choirs, I'd love to see them performing at national conferences, international touring, that kind of thing. And we've got work to do.
Yeah.
So
And in order to do all those things, of course, it's going to cost money. Right. And that means, and tying back to our earlier part of the conversation, that means some of the projects you do will have to make money, and that horrible bad word of profit might have to come in. And the way, and this will be kind of my final thought on this topic, but I don't, see if this turn this into a t-shirt quote. I don't sing to make money. I don't make choral music to make money. It costs money to make choral music. And those are two completely different ways of looking at it. And if you have that second way of looking at it, it's like, no, I'm actually trying to get as much money as I can. But so I can do more music, right? And if your motivation is directed towards the art, then you can be an entrepreneur and an artist, and those things don't have to be in conflict. And I think that entrepreneurial spirit is really what the profession needs post-COVID, because we are shrinking in so many places, and we're now in a landscape where we're going to have to be advocates. We're going to have to be going out into the community and selling people on why choral music should matter to them.
Yeah.
Final thoughts on that?
Oh, absolutely. I think the fact that it takes money to make choral music is really just obscured by the public school system, which is, again, I think we both agree, a really good thing. But you're still paying a teacher an average of $56,000 per year plus benefits to run this choral program. That's just kind of obscured by the fact that your taxes go out this way and then it comes back to the teacher this way. Yes, I agree completely. And in something like the Youth Chorus of Kansas City, it's a bit more direct, and we are essentially With the profits that we're earning, we just call it net income. That money then goes to broaden the accessibility to students who wouldn't otherwise be able to have this opportunity. And the end goal in an organization like that is not that then whatever is left over goes to the shareholders or the owners.
That would be the for-profit model.
Exactly. It instead goes to either personnel, or it goes to create a second transportation program, or it can go to anything. And I'm not saying what we're doing yet, because we don't even know,
right.
But it takes money to make these things happen, and there is still a transaction involved, whether we want to admit it or not.
And we have to provide value to a customer.
That's exactly right.
Whether in public school or in the fine arts nonprofits or in for-profit, there is still ultimately a consumer of what it is that we're producing. That has to want that product, or else we none of us have jobs, including public school.
Exactly, and I think anyone who is maybe starting in a small program that they want to grow, or maybe their numbers have taken a slight hit after COVID, and they're trying to figure out how to build those numbers back up to where they were. I think they do need to think in those value terms. What is the value that I'm offering to my students? And what is going to make this of value to them to want to get them to want to stay? But you asked a question a moment ago about in 10 years for the nonprofit, but I don't think I answered for the publishing.
Oh yeah,
company.
go ahead.
Yeah. So that is a really interesting question. I think I've spent a lot less time thinking about. But what I would love to see is for it to be essentially cash positive enough to where I'm able to outsource the more monotonous tasks, and I really get to focus on working with composers and composing. And that's basically it. That someone else is running the website, that someone else is writing the copy that goes on JW Pepper and everywhere else. Some of those things I enjoy less, to be frank. And, we all have parts of our jobs that we don't like. So
that's the dream. Yeah.
I think that is the dream. That's I can only imagine that's part of the motivation for you to get new sponsors too. Is that there are probably parts of this that you might outsource at some point.
I mean, I have a college undergrad and a high school kid who create all my social media content, and I pay them to do it because I don't have time to do it. Can
I get their numbers?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. I'm sure they would love some more gigs. But yeah, Ryan, this has been great. I think the idea of kind of talking through what it looks like, what it feels like to branch out beyond the classroom, ultimately as choral musicians, even if you're firmly entrenched in education as your focus, and there's nothing wrong with that, as I said before. But wouldn't we want our students to have this vision of, I'm going to teach you all this stuff about music so that you can take it out into the world and use music in some capacity? And I think that's really what we're both doing with all of our endeavors.
Yeah.
Was that a pun there?
I could not appreciate that more. I encourage it strongly.
Yeah, good. That's awesome. Well, Ryan, thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you, as always, for sticking around to the end of the episode. I hope you got some enjoyment out of that. I really have become enamored with the idea of recording these episodes with guests in person. I hope to do that more and more. Joining over at Patreon really helps with that. The recording equipment that you see and hear for those on-location episodes is a little bit more involved than here in my studio at home, so that has all been provided by Patreon support. If you see Choralosophy on social media, if it pops up in your feed on a regular basis, that's Patreon support. If you are able to take advantage of the choralosophy.com website that has stored so many resources over the last 4.5 years, that's paid for with Patreon support. So make sure you head on over to patreon.com/Choralosophy and join over there to keep us going. And of course, on the way out, enter your Choralosophy promo code any chance you get. So that's your ryanmain.com, now endeavormusicpublishing.com, graphitepublishing.com, Voce Vista. The link is in the show notes to get the discount there for your audio analyzing software, mymusicfolders.com, and sitereadingfactory.com. Thanks a lot, and we'll see you next time.